Most people are not destroyed by failure. They are destroyed by comfort, distraction, and a life spent avoiding themselves. And Seneca warned us about this 2,000 years ago. There is a reason Seneca still speaks to the modern mind with unsettling clarity, because he was not writing for comfort, and he was not writing for admiration. He was writing for survival of the soul in a hostile world, a world ruled by chaos, power games, emotional instability, and the constant illusion that external success could save a person from internal collapse. And Seneca knew, perhaps better than anyone of his time, that the greatest prison a human being can inhabit is not made of stone, but of unchecked thoughts, unexamined desires, and a life spent reacting instead of ruling the self. Seneca lived surrounded by wealth, political danger, exile, and death threats. Yet his philosophy was never about escaping reality. It was about standing firmly inside it without being consumed. And this is where modern interpretations of Stoicism often fail, because Seneca was not teaching emotional numbness, he was teaching emotional sovereignty. And there is a profound difference between suppressing emotion and mastering it, between denying fear and seeing it so clearly that it loses its power over you. Seneca warned that most people are exhausted, not because life is hard, but because they waste themselves on things that do not matter, and he observed that human beings bleed their energy into gossip, anxiety, status games, resentment, and imagined futures that never arrive, and in doing so they abandon the only moment where life can actually be lived, which is now, not in the shallow motivational sense, but in the deeply strategic sense of attention control, because attention, for Seneca, was life itself, and wherever you place it, you place your existence. One of Seneca's most disturbing insights is that people fear loss more than they value freedom, which is why they remain psychologically enslaved long after physical chains are gone. And this fear of loss keeps people obedient, anxious, and permanently distracted, chasing security while sacrificing peace. And Seneca saw this as the greatest tragedy of the human condition, because no tyrant, no corrupt ruler, no hostile fate can dominate a person who has mastered their inner life. Yet most people hand over that power willingly. He wrote that it is not the man who has little who is poor, but the man who desires more. And this idea cuts deeper than minimalism or frugality, because Seneca was pointing to a psychological truth that modern neuroscience confirms, that desire without limit becomes a form of suffering, a bottomless hunger that no achievement can satisfy. And the more a person feeds it, the weaker they become, because their happiness is always postponed, always dependent, always fragile. Seneca believed that time is the most precious resource, not money, not status, not influence, and this is why he warned so harshly against procrastination, not as a productivity flaw, but as a moral failure, because when you delay living wisely, you are not just wasting hours, you are wasting your character. You are allowing randomness to shape who you become, instead of deliberate values, and over time, this erosion becomes irreversible. He observed that people guard their property fiercely, yet allow strangers, employers, social expectations and emotional impulses to steal their time without resistance, and this voluntary surrender is what creates lives filled with regret, because when people finally wake up, they realize they were busy without being alive, occupied without being fulfilled, and exhausted without having built anything meaningful within themselves. Seneca's teachings were not optimistic, but they were empowering, because he did not promise that life would be fair, only that it could be faced with dignity, and he constantly reminded his students that suffering is not what breaks people, but resistance to suffering, the refusal to accept reality as it is. And this is where his philosophy becomes brutally practical, because instead of asking why something happened, Seneca asks how you will respond, what kind of person you will be when tested. He encouraged negative visualization not as pessimism, but as psychological training, imagining loss, exile, illness, death, not to dwell in fear, but to remove fear's surprise, because what terrifies people most is not pain, but unpredictability. And when you rehearse hardship mentally, you weaken its grip. You turn catastrophe into something familiar, something survivable, and in doing so, you reclaim agency over your emotional life. Seneca warned that luxury softens the mind and that comfort, when unexamined, becomes dangerous because it creates fragility, and fragility leads to panic when life inevitably disrupts stability. And this is why he deliberately practiced voluntary discomfort, sleeping on hard surfaces, wearing simple clothing, limiting food, not as self-punishment, but as preparation, reminding himself that he could endure far more than fear suggested, and that freedom begins when you no longer need everything to go well. One of Seneca's most profound insights is that anger is temporary madness, and that it arises not from events themselves, but from the judgments we attach to them. And he believed that the angry person is always a slave, reacting, escalating, destroying their own peace for the illusion of control. And this idea is devastating when applied to modern life, where outrage is monetized, conflict is encouraged, and emotional volatility is rewarded, because Seneca would argue that a person who cannot govern their anger cannot govern anything at all. He taught that wisdom is not found in isolation, but in constant self-examination, asking difficult questions, confronting uncomfortable truths, and refusing to lie to oneself, because self-deception, according to Seneca, is the root of all misery, and most people suffer not because they are unlucky, but because they refuse to see themselves clearly, choosing comforting illusions over honest reflection. Seneca believed that adversity reveals character rather than creates it, and that misfortune acts like fire, burning away what is weak and exposing what is real. And this is why he saw challenges as opportunities for moral testing, not in a religious sense, but in a psychological one. Because who you become under pressure determines the quality of your life far more than circumstances ever will. He warned against seeking validation from crowds, calling it a dangerous addiction, because the crowd is fickle, inconsistent, and driven by impulse rather than reason. And when you base your self-worth on approval, you surrender your autonomy, allowing others to dictate your emotional state. And Seneca viewed this as a form of self-betrayal, a quiet abandonment of one's own judgment. One of his most radical ideas is that death should be contemplated daily, not morbidly, but intelligently, because awareness of mortality sharpens priorities, strips away trivial concerns, and forces clarity about what truly matters. And Seneca argued that people fear death because they have not truly lived, because a life spent avoiding discomfort, chasing approval, and postponing purpose leaves the soul unprepared for its end. He believed that the wise person is not fearless but unafraid of fear itself, understanding that emotions rise and fall like weather, and that resisting them only strengthens them, while observing them weakens their control. And this level of emotional mastery requires patience, humility, and constant practice, not sudden enlightenment. Seneca rejected the idea that philosophy was abstract or academic, insisting that it must be lived daily, applied to decisions, reactions, relationships, and self-talk, because wisdom that remains theoretical is useless. And he criticized those who collected ideas without transformation, seeing them as intellectually entertained but spiritually unchanged. He wrote that true freedom comes from wanting nothing that can be taken from you. And this idea strikes at the heart of modern anxiety, where identity is tied to careers, possessions, social status, and external validation, all of which are unstable, impermanent, and beyond complete control. And Seneca would argue that peace begins when your sense of self is anchored internally rather than externally. He also emphasized compassion, not as weakness, but as strength, recognizing that cruelty often stems from ignorance and inner turmoil, and that responding with measured understanding preserves one's own peace, even when confronting injustice, because hatred corrodes the container that holds it. Seneca's philosophy was not about withdrawing from life, but engaging with it wisely, participating without attachment, striving without desperation, loving without possession, and enduring without bitterness. And this balanced approach is what makes his teachings timeless, because they address the core of human struggle, not its changing surface. In a world obsessed with speed, Seneca valued slowness of thought, depth of reflection, and intentional living, reminding us that a hurried life is a shallow one, and that clarity emerges when the mind is not constantly pulled in 1,000 directions, reacting instead of choosing. He believed that greatness is not loud, that strength does not need to announce itself, and that the calmest mind in the room often holds the greatest power, because it cannot be easily provoked, manipulated, or destabilized, and this quiet dominance is the ultimate Stoic ideal. Seneca's teachings challenge us to ask uncomfortable questions, not about how to succeed, but about how to remain whole, how to maintain integrity in a world that rewards compromise, how to face uncertainty without losing oneself, and how to live in such a way that when the end arrives, there is no panic, only acceptance. And perhaps the most haunting lesson Seneca leaves us with is this, that life is long enough if you know how to use it, but most people do not, because they are distracted, afraid, and unwilling to confront themselves. And the tragedy is not death, but never truly living before it arrives. If you want to continue exploring this level of ancient wisdom, if you want to build a mind that cannot be shaken by chaos, fear, or manipulation, then subscribe to Stoic Gateway, where timeless philosophy meets modern life, and where we learn not just how to think, but how to live.